Let's bring in now Sky News host James McPherson and commentator Jason Morrison.
That's
Welcome
good.
to you
Thanks,
both. Well, what do you think, Jason? I mean, this is just pure smugness, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. But it's right to the brand. I mean, he talks about, Rogan preying on the insecurities of people. The ABC, I don't see Rogan framing up soldiers and adding things in to make them look like war criminals. The ABC's got some problems, and the public is voting with its remote. I mean, last night, television ratings, 800,000 people around Australia, 800,000, only that many tuned in to the ABC's TV news. It puts it below 7, below 9. It puts it sort of where Channel 10 is. It's failing. And it's failing because it's not doing what people want. So he sits there and they all were, ha-ha-haing about Joe Rogan.
The whole press gallery was laughing about it.
They thought it was fantastic. The problem with it is Joe Rogan's got a staff of, 5? I mean, more people work on Media Watch than work on Rogan's program. And this is the thing the ABC does not get. It's doing something people don't want anymore. That's why they're not watching you. And it doesn't help when, a so-called chairman, that's his approach to it, is to belittle what the audiences are turning to at the moment. I don't get how they can't learn.
This is part of the election outcome in the US.
Yeah.
James, it's because there's this elite attitude that people are rejecting. Joe Rogan, we don't agree with every of his... And he's not a right-wing firebrand, by the way. He's a contrarian, has different positions on things. I don't agree with him on Israel, for example. But he interviews people for hours at a time. How can anyone object to that?
Well, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? I think this is why Kim Williams doesn't like Joe Rogan, because Kim Williams has access to more than $1 billion a year and yet can't get near the audience or the influence of Joe Rogan, who's, what his qualification is, he used to be involved in World Federation Wrestling. Yeah. No wonder Kim Williams is jealous. You mentioned the Trump interview. I mean, prior to that interview, Trump was Hitler, Trump was a fascist, but Joe Rogan allowed Donald Trump to sit and talk for 3 hours. We should note Kamala Harris didn't want to talk for 3 hours because 3 hours is too long. She was, but she made excuses to get out of it because 3 hours is too long to stick to your talking points, which she would have done. But over 3 hours, people listened and found that Donald Trump wasn't a madman. He wasn't crazy. Now, you might not have agreed with him, but he wasn't the Hitler or the fascist he was being painted to be. And the Joe Rogan interview really changed things up for the US election. I got to say, when Kim Williams started talking about media that was malevolent and, played on people's fears and anxieties, I thought he was talking about the ABC.
With their climate change coverage.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to ask you about Chris Bowen, because this has been a very big story this week. Jason, we faced blackouts. He's blaming coal, the fact that there wasn't enough of it yesterday, and yet he's been rushing to get coal out of the system.
Yes, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? Look, as the sun moved from its peak and started to drift towards the horizon, as it does at that end of the day, he can only be thankful that at about 4 o'clock yesterday, demand significantly dropped in New South Wales, probably because they put a few phone calls into a few big users of energy and said, can you shut down? We are effed. And that is the truth. If they had kept demand up, we would have run out because the sun stopped shining and the coal was all that did it. But, New South Wales, and I guess I talk about New South Wales as my place, but New South Wales should be thankful that Queensland still has common sense and Victoria still has enough of it, despite all that's gone on in there politically over the history of the last 10 years. New South Wales has closed all of its coal generation down, bar a few. Queensland's kept it going, and thank God Victoria has burnt brown coal, the dirtiest of the lot, or we wouldn't have had power yesterday. And that's the truth. And, it's the kind of Matt Keane generation, the teenage advisors that have got into the heads of people like that, and now we're seeing Bowen do disastrous things as well, that are leaving us with this crisis. Everyone has known we're going to have extra demand for electricity because we know what life is like. We also know we have a huge population growth going on at the moment.
Exactly.
Put them all together. The lines are crossing and they're failing.
100%. There's big immigration policy putting pressure not just on the housing crisis, the housing supply, but also, of course, on our electricity grid. But James, this idea, right? We're in first world country, a developed country, Australia, And we have to time when we run the dishwasher if we have a dishwasher, or time when we put the air conditioner on if we have one, or don't put it on as cold as you might want to. I mean, it's absurd.
If you'd told me 15 years ago that in 2024 we'll be rationing electricity, I would have thought, what disaster befell us? I wouldn't have imagined no disaster, just Chris Bowen, which I suppose, as you pointed out in your brilliant editorial, is kind of a disaster. Chris Minns made a brilliant point when he told Sydney-siders, from 3 p.m, can you please turn off all your appliances? Because he said at 3 p.m, solar really doesn't produce much energy. It's also the same time everyone is arriving home.
Yeah.
Well, he just rang the bell, didn't he? That's what we've been saying. Solar is wonderful, but it doesn't supply power when most people are using it. So it's absolutely unbelievable that as a first world country, we're being told, don't use your dishwasher, don't wash your clothes, try not to put the aircon on. And Chris Bowen said it's a severe heat wave. I mean, it was 28 degrees in Port Macquarie. It was 32 in the city centre. It was 39 in Penrith, but you deserve that if you live in Penrith. I mean, this was hardly a heat wave. Right. It's summer.
It wasn't a severe heat wave.
And Bowen is from Fairfield. He's from Fairfield in Sydney. You know, Fairfield in Sydney is right at the peak of the west. He knows yesterday wasn't a hot day. He knows it didn't even come close to it.
Exactly.
And, you know, I heard Barnaby Joyce say earlier that, you know, when he was in Queensland, around St George in Queensland, you used to have fortnights over 40. You know, this is not a shock to Australia, what's going on. And some of the dimwits in the Australian media who kind of use phrases like extreme heat and heat wave and all that bullshit, it just does not match reality. And we're unfortunately letting these clowns get away with it. They should actually be put on trial for what they have done to our country, not rewarded with positive spin.
It's such a mess. And this is just another one of them. I'm going to say it again. Albotrocities. Came up with that term this week. Albotrocities. This energy crisis is just another one on the list of albotrocities, and it's going to turn people off him ahead of the next election. I really don't want to talk about Lidia Thorpe because I just can't stand watching her. It just makes me so annoyed, but I feel like we can't ignore it because it was such a big story in Canberra today. She pulled another one of her tiresome stunts. She stormed up to the press gallery in the Senate after being banned from the Senate. So she wanted to still make herself heard, and she was.
Free Palestine!
I call the clerk.
Palestine will be free!
I call the clerk.
I mean, she just couldn't help herself, James. She just is desperate for attention, and it's so frustrating to think she's still going to be a senator until 2028.
Yeah, I watched an interview with her on the ABC this morning, and what got my attention was that over the course of 4.5 minutes of an interview, she used the word racism or racist 17 times. That's once every 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And remember, this all began in reference to Pauline Hanson questioning Senator Payman's eligibility to sit in the Senate, which is the same question that was raised of Barnaby Joyce. It wasn't racist then, but now it's suddenly racist. And Lidia Thorpe just continually uses race as an excuse to, exercise the most appalling behaviour that would never be tolerated by anyone else. I should point out that not once did the ABC viewers pull her up over this allegation of racism. They allowed her to get away with it. And that's a big reason why Lidia Thorpe has been allowed to continue like this, because the mainstream media don't pick her up and call her out for her behaviour.
Yeah, that's so surprising because there hasn't been any racism against her. People's objections have got nothing to do with her race and all to do with her conduct.
Look, she's not quite right. You know, I mean, look at it. You know, and I know you're worried about me saying something defamatory here,
yes,
so I will minimise my discussion here. But I think that is the best way of dealing with it. She's not right, and she shouldn't be in the House. And what should shock the hell out of Australia is she's there until June 28.
Yeah.
She's not even halfway through the term yet. Oh, she's there for as long as Matt Canavan is there. You know, there's reality, Australia. That's what you got. That's what your parliament's delivered you.
The Senate is not pretty at all.